Hi everyone. I just wanted to revisit some of my April Bible codes that I haven't gone over yet. If you recall, I had done a couple of Bible codes on April that I presented, but then I still had more that I needed to present, but I had actually started getting into some other things and had said I would get back into the April Bible codes. And I figured now would be a good time to do that since this date that was given here in this April Bible code, which I've shared, this initial date right here has already passed. That would have been yesterday on the Hebrew calendar. That would have been the first day of the first month. It would have been our April 9th. So that would have been yesterday. And it looks like that may have been the beginning of a time frame, because if you go back to my second Advent table, you'll see that it had two dates given on it. One was the first day of the first month, which corresponds with April 9th, and the other date that was given is the second month, the 7th and 20th day of the month. And that would be ER 27, which is when sunset begins the 28th, which is Yom Yerushalayim, which is Jerusalem Day, which we celebrate on our calendar usually around June 7th. It's the day that Jerusalem was retaken. So it falls a little bit differently on our calendar, and usually in Israel they celebrate both dates. So it looks like that may have been a time frame. And then of course 1 week after that is Shavuot, which starts on June 12th through the 13th. That's actually the counting of the Omer starts back in Nisan with first fruits. So this is when the beginning of the count takes place, which would be our April 24th. So Passover would be this week starting from the 14th of Nisan and going through to the 21st or the 22nd of Nisan. So that would be April 23rd through April 30th would be the Jewish Passover. And then first fruits is in the middle of that, which begins the counting of the Omer. So this whole time frame is very significant. And like I said, this time frame was given in the second Advent table. And in the April table, it had this date over here, the first day of the first month, but it also said in the 7 and 20th year over here. But you could just take these dates, the 7th and 20th, and just skip over to here and say day of the month. So it could be given the same time frame. But I checked to see if it had the second month in this table, and it didn't come up. And I also checked for the month of ER, but that's not found in the index because it's a Hebrew word, and it usually doesn't have Hebrew words in the index. So you can't search for that. So I don't know if that would have come up or not. But the second month doesn't come up, so I can't be sure if it's relating to that second date as well or not. But it could be interpreted as the 7th and 20th day of the month if you just skip down just below it. So I don't know if this is referring to a time frame, but since the first date passed on this table, I thought I would revisit the April tables. But before I show them to you, they're very interesting, but I think they'll make a lot more sense, as you can see, just to get a preview. I think they'll make a lot more sense, however, if I explain some things in the scripture first so you can understand why this time frame is significant. Okay, you have to go back to Leviticus where it speaks of the first fruits to understand the significance of the entire time frame. Okay, in verse 10, in Leviticus 23, verse 10, it says, "Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, when ye be come into the land which I give unto you, and shall reap the harvest thereof, then ye shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest unto the priest." Okay, when you take this to today's terms, Israel went into the land on around June 7th of 1967. That's when Israel went into the land, because this whole thing in Leviticus that was given about the 6 days and the 7th day, it was all based on when Israel went into the land after the Exodus, when Moses was given these commandments. And then, of course, Israel was in exile from the land up until 1948, and they didn't really fully go back into the land until they had possession of the capital, which is Jerusalem. So in today's terms, this is the time frame that Israel went into the land, and that's when the counting needs to begin. So that's when they need to start, or they needed to start observing the Sabbaths as far as cultivating the land, because when they're not in the land they can't cultivate it. So it all had to begin when they're in the land, because it's all based on the agriculture and cultivating the land. So this would have begun on June 7th of 1967. And this is talking about the first fruits, which would be during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. This is the first sheaf that is presented. But then it goes on to speak of another first fruits offering that's made after the 49 days from that date, on the 50th day. And okay, and that would be right here in verse 15, where it talks about that. And it says, "And ye shall count unto you from the morrow after the Sabbath, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, 7 Sabbaths shall be complete. Even unto the morrow after the 7th Sabbath shall ye number 50 days, and ye shall offer a new meat offering unto the Lord. And you shall bring out of your habitations 2 wave loaves of 2/10 deals. They shall be of fine flour. They shall be baken with leaven. They are the first fruits unto the Lord." So there's 2 first fruits offerings. One is made in the middle of the unleavened bread, the morrow after the Sabbath, and then the next one is 49 days later, the morrow after the Sabbath, which would be the 50th day. In English we call it Pentecost, but in Hebrew they call that day Shavuot, and that's when the second offering is made. Now what's interesting is that these 2 countdowns of 50 days converge right around June, somewhere between June 7th and June 13th. That's when Shavuot is, the 12th and the 13th, and it actually begins on sunset June 11th. Now, if you look at the 6-Day War, you'll see that it lasted from June 5th through June 10th. So even though it's celebrated around the 7th, it was a 6-day war that ended on the 10th. So the 11th would be when Israel actually had possession. And that's when Shavuot begins at sunset on the 11th, because the first day is on the 12th. So these two dates converge at that time, the countdown of the 50 years as well as the countdown of the 50 days. So, and we're in that year of the Jubilee because it's been 49 years now, literally. I know that there was some that were saying it was back in September, but I don't think God makes things that difficult for us. I think He expects us to make more simple calculations, and also because of the leap years, to use prophetic years would not be accurate because there would be several leap years within that time frame of 50 years. So it makes more sense that a literal counting of years is what determines the 50 years. And this June 7th or around that time would be the actual 49th birthday of Israel. If you think of it in terms of birthdays, that's when they close their 49 years, and that's when they begin their 50th year. If you think of it in terms of birthdays. So they would begin to their 50th year on June 7th, and that would be the Jubilee year. So it's interesting that they both converge on at the same time, the 50-day count as well as the 50-year count. So I just wanted to explain that before getting into the tables, because I think the tables make reference to that, and I just needed to explain that first. So I'm going to go into the tables in the next video. Thanks.